Welcome back to the HRE4M audio files series. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 4. Again, probably from now on, I'll probably try to do these in one take instead of two different files, just to make it easier, and only because it allows me to condense some of the material that'll hopefully make it a little easier for you to kind of pick through. Um, Chapter 4 it talks about the naming of God and ethics, and really this is where um, you see more of the religion, Christian religion, Catholic religion, um, being linked to what we've discussed in chapters 1, 2, and 3 when it comes to this idea of ethics and morality, agency, freedom, choice, and conscience. We're now going to try to marry those to an understanding of the Catholic religion. So it starts out talking about this idea of revelation, which is the concept of God in some way revealing himself to an individual, group of individuals. And that revelation can come in many different forms. It can come as some kind of direct revelation. People have claimed, rightly so, that they've been, given something or shown something by God. Other people will claim that that revelation comes from um, the idea that somebody has revealed something about God or God's message to them, which for most of us, for Catholics, it's Christ, it's Jesus who's revealed God's plans for us. Um, for the Jews, our predecessors, they'll claim that it's the prophets. And you can look at other faiths and you'll find that they will point to other leaders as people who've revealed something to them, something important. So revelation becomes kind of this cornerstone, if you will, when we talk about um, Catholic ethics and morality. And the text will go on and discuss the story of Moses and his revelation via the burning bush, and then the idea that that revelation leads to a mission, and that mission is revealing God's message to everyone else or people who are willing to listen. Uh, you should have a pretty good idea about the story of Moses. If you don't, by all means, feel free to Google it. Uh, Most of you have probably watched The Prince of Egypt at some point. That's a nice little condensed synopsis of it. From this idea of uh, that revelation, we get the Ten Commandments, or the 10 words, or the Decalogue, or the Decalogue, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Those 10 words, those 10 commandments become kind of the basis for a renewed covenant with the Jews, but become a basis for the Christian covenant we have with God. And again, they're revealed to us, and they're continually revealed to us in different ways to kind of reinforce the fact that those revelations play a role in shaping our conscience and our ethics and morality. From there, we get into this idea of a covenant. That covenant is really a situation where we are dealing with an agreement. So that it's an ancient term that says, it's an agreement between two parties. There's rights and responsibilities on either side, and those rights and responsibilities are spelled out in some kind of contract. So, from a religious perspective, that covenant is really, for Christians, it's attending church on Sundays, it's going to confession, participating in the sacraments, with those responsibilities being we're given some kind of rights to some kind of eternal salvation, um, the right to request God's intervention or God's help, depending on what's going on in our lives, etc. Um, the easiest way to try to remember or understand what a covenant is, if you think about in terms of marriage, it's become a much more secular covenant, but it really its covenant roots are really in the religion, at least in the Christian religion. From most of the things you'll see in the media regarding marriage here in the Western world, uh, there's there's a number of elements to that covenant. I will let you look at those in the text and examine them, but really, in a nutshell, if you were to look at those five elements, you can see how they, if you walk through a wedding ceremony, Catholic wedding ceremony, those five elements are there. They're not laid out that way, but they're there. Um, a much more secularized version of a covenant is the fact is really when you get a job. You have a part-time job. You are really entering into a covenant. Now, it's not a covenant in the sense that there's religious implications, or there's implications for your eternal soul, or your ethics and morality to a degree. It is about uh, the fact that you could go through those five elements and they will match up with things that you have either experienced, are experiencing, or could experience in a job. Okay, so again, rights and responsibilities, two parties involved, and they have to respect each other's rights, but also have to adhere to specific responsibilities. Um, from that idea of a covenant comes this concept of your name. And why is that important? Because if somebody can call you by name, address you by name, it implies a level of familiarity that kind of transcends just being an acquaintance, and that's important when we look at A, revelation, and then B, how those revelations may have an impact on you ethically and morally, because they are really directed to you specifically, not to some kind of the general faceless mass or masses of people, but to the individual. And whether you want to accept it or not, it's a Christian belief that uh, we're all called by name. So when we're given a name, that name really kind of identifies us. Yes, people share names or have the same name. It doesn't mean that we're all, you can lump every Ella, every Jane, every John, every Fred together. It's the fact that your name is unique, because when you look at your first and your last name, that's unique to a degree. And that uniqueness is uh, what allows revelation to draw on its influences for your ethics and morality and your conscience. From that idea of a covenant, it's then you make this agreement, and then from an ancient standpoint, it then begets this idea of being called. So you've entered into a covenant with God, and that one of those responsibilities is responding to that call. And that response in the Old Testament or in the ancient world for people of any kind of religious influence was to then spread that message to the people. And there's six elements. I'm not going to go through the individual elements of a call story, but those six elements really are the byproduct of entering into an agreement and a covenant. And to be honest with you, when you look at yourselves in high school and you look at your high school careers, you are to a degree living that covenant, and therefore a call story. So you've entered into grade 12, you've made a covenant with yourself to try to get marks in certain courses, achieve certain, you know, expectations, with the idea that this will then put you on some kind of career path, career track, give you some access to uh, uh, a vocation, a life, a career that is going to shape your life, and in turn shape the lives of the people you come into contact with via that vocation, that calling. That comes from, again, it comes from making covenants with yourselves, and there's where I don't think people realize when we talk specifically uh, during the pandemic, during the lockdown and post lockdown, and this continued pandemic lifestyle, what people are really struggling with is that inability to maintain or respond to or recognize that they are making covenants with themselves, and keeping or breaking those covenants not only has social emotional effect, but it can result in physical symptoms. It can result in some negatives happening. And what I mean by that is and there have been studies which you feel free to look those up online as well, that point to the fact that when you make promises to yourselves and you break them, breaking those promises really does have some kind of negative side effect on the individual. And again, you listen to people talking about the fact that there's a need for a change in lifestyles, and people got to do this, and people are developing new habits and stuff. The only reason those habits stick or make sense is if people make some kind of covenant to themselves and respond to the call of that covenant by turning around and following through. But it starts with the individual. Like, there's where this tends to, I think, people get lost in the fact that they don't have some kind of group backup, if you will, or that social extension to therefore kind of reinforce what you're doing. That's the interesting part when you look at this covenant, this call story. God doesn't call an individual and his friends or her friends. He calls an individual. And that individual has to then turn around and make a covenant and then accept that call and participate in it. And that, I think, is really has more resonance and importance now than it really ever has in the last number of years for humanity. Just when you look at what the pandemic has done for people, or has done to the world and done to people, you really now have to look at yourself and decide that you yourself are going to be capable of making a change or addressing a change and implementing that change and moving forward with it. Accept that. And that's what you're seeing people struggle with. You hear this, people talk about this new normal, and people it's fatigue. How can you be tired with change and recognize that you need to embrace that change to keep you and other people safe, and you can claim that you're fatigued from having to live like that? To me, it's the fact that people they lack the self-discipline. And again, when you look at what a covenant is and whether people can maintain one or not, even from an theoretical discussion of marriage as a covenant, 1 in 2.5 marriages end in divorce. Not all of that is because people marry individuals who then manifest personality traits that make them abusive or dangerous. It is the fact that I think for a lot of people, they lack the self-discipline to recognize that covenant results in a call story that is not always going to be sunshine and roses. It will have its down times, and it will have dark periods, and you have to have the self-discipline to work through those because it's important to you, not because it's simply important to your spouse, or you're doing it for your children, or doing it for some other reason. Those reasons won't hold up long term. And that's why, again, if you start looking at the material and you look at this idea of a covenant and then spawning a call story, it's not a group thing. It's not, we're calling all of you, and therefore you can, you got to lean on each other. And when things get tough, if everybody else gives up, you can give up too, because, you don't have anybody else. That's not what this is. It's an individual call. That's why you're called by name. And that call really is going to need you to make some kind of covenant and respect that, even when it gets tough, and work through that. From that idea of that call story, you're going to see the text get into some examples. And then really the chapter ends, which is going to seem like a weird note to end on, but it then talks about sin, or this idea of transgression. Now this is very much rooted in the Judaic history of Christianity, in the sense that, you violated the Ten Commandments, you violated Mosaic law, you've transgressed, therefore it's a sin. Sin can come in various shapes, sizes, and forms, and that sin is really ignoring elements of that covenant and call story, or willfully working against it. That in a nutshell is what sin can be seen as, and it's not a stretch to kind of look at that and make that connection, not simply to our marriage example, but you can look at it from a perspective of your job, that kind of set of examples. You can look at it within friendships. You get people nowadays, there's constant nattering and discussions within even the church, whether you're Christian or not, with this idea that there are elements within the church that believe we're going backwards instead of forwards. Other elements are going, we haven't gone forward enough. Those are variations and degrees of sin because we've lost sight of that core covenant and call story. And there's the overall takeaway from this chapter, and the hot topics you're going to do is that core. If you can get back to that core covenant and that core call story for you, whatever that may look like, moving forward is going to be easier. It's going to be less daunting and difficult because you'll have rooted yourself in something solid. Again, as usual, if you have any questions or concerns about this, feel free to email me or bring it up in class, and I can address any questions you have.